be a third major party. So I think that this election may very well be the last election in which the lid can be kept on, in which the two-party system, which has been in existence since really, since the Civil War, is about to find itself under major attack. Um, I think that if the third parties get a significant number of votes, in some states that will put them on the ballot without having to gather lots of citizen signatures for the next 4 years, and that'll be good. And I also think that it'll put a lot of pressure. There is a scenario in which Gary Johnson takes either his home state of New Mexico or New Mexico and Utah. He's now polling 24% in Utah, and that, by the way, in a three-way race, you can win with the third. And in New Mexico, the same thing is happening. If he wins either of those states, it is likely that neither Trump nor Clinton will have the 270 electoral college votes they need in order to become president. Uh, Now, that doesn't mean that there's a second round of voting by the citizens. What it means is that the article in the Constitution that covers what happens when nobody gets a majority in the Electoral College comes into effect. Now, remember the.
And will they
Go ahead.
And will they put black smoke through the chimney or white smoke through the chimney when one of them is elected?
They may be confused actually. What happens is under those circumstances, first of all, originally the Constitution includes a number of major compromises that allowed the various states to come together under one government. One of those compromises was the nature of the U.S. Senate and how each state would have an equal vote. And another was the Electoral College, which intentionally gives greater weight to the lower population states. And so this is not a pure democracy. This society is a republic, a federal republic, in which there are checks and balances. So let's look at what happens if nobody gets 270 electoral votes. What happens is the choice of president devolves down to Congress. The United States Senate gets to choose the vice president from the two top electoral college vote getters. So they would probably have to choose between the Republican or the Democrat. Meanwhile, the U.S. House gets to choose among the top three electoral college vote getters. And in that vote, each state gets one vote determined by a majority of the delegates, the congressmen from that state, congress ladies from that state. Uh, right now, the Republicans control a majority of the state delegations, but there's a lot of dislike in Congress. The Republican, so-called Republican nominee, actually the individual who engaged in a hostile takeover of the Republican Party and did so successfully. Why? Because a lot of people had walked out of the Republican Party over the past 4 years, a lot of libertarians especially, and the Republican Party was sort of a rump party to begin with. That's what happened to the Whigs before they collapsed. I think we're seeing the same scenario working its way through. And I believe that depending on how this election turns out, that could be accelerated, especially if the U.S. House chooses a president and a coalition of Democrat states and Republican states get together and decide that they could work better with Gary Johnson than they could ever work with either Hillary or Donald. So we shall see. As I said, it could be an interesting year.
Well, that is a most fascinating analysis. Anything that presupposes a win by Gary Johnson under any circumstances is most fascinating. Uh, uh, Fantasy ridden, but fascinating. Um, the question that I was raising was whether if citizens do convene grand juries, they can make them weighty and significant organizations.
Well, unless it's an official grand jury under the state statute, it doesn't get to actually issue an indictment that gets brought to court. What those citizen grand juries, and there's a great history of them. Remember during the Vietnam War, there were a number of such events that were organized where people were in effect held up to public
Yeah, but
scorn.
those are not grand juries. Those were trials, mock
Tribunals,
trials,
tribunals,
tribunals.
private
Yes, they were
tribunals. Yeah,
tribunals with no legal sanction
yeah.
authority and with no legal.
I don't read Scalia's decision as saying that you can simply create a grand jury in a vacuum. I mean, he was talking
Uh,
about what the traditional law was, and uh, and he was not saying that you can convene a grand jury in violation of a statute in a state that sets up the way in which a grand jury is convened.
well,
And
damn.
that's why I'm little, I'm not sure. I'm going to read that decision. I'm going to read it
I'm
carefully because
gonna
it's a
I'm
lot.
gonna send it to you.
Please, yeah, because there's a lot of meat there, and I do know, Janet, that there are people out there who are convening citizens' grand juries. I haven't heard any of them get to the point where there is a trial before an Article 3 judge, for example. So that's I think interesting issues. This being the political season, we will no doubt be talking about politics in the Dr. Rima Truth Reports over the next few weeks. Uh,
I think we're
uh,
always talking about
Always,
politics, Ralph.
yeah,
We can
true,
talk about it as health. We can talk about it as money. We
right.
can talk about it as pollution policy. But we're always talking. We can talk about it as GMOs. But it is all politics.
And remember, folks, that's a good reminder, Dr. Rima. Um, a word to the wise. We are hearing more and more reports coming back that a monetary crisis is brewing. It has to do with some German banks and whether they will get bailed out or not. And the German government says no. Maybe the European Central Bank will say yes. And one way or the other, uh, it's October has hardly begun, and there was plenty of room for a number of October surprises. That's for sure. Right. So, Janet, uh, we've been talking about a number of important topics, and certainly the topic that you bring to us, which is the most powerful, is the topic about the conventions that apply to the behavior of the U.S. government and whether or
I
not
have to
any
ask you to
major
talk a little
power.
louder,
Oh,
please, Ralph.
yeah,
I'm really
I'm
having a hard time
a lot
hearing
of
you.
noise in the
Thank you.
background. Dr. Rima, could you put yourself on mute? Yeah, that'll work. All right.
Done.
Done. Dr. Rima is, of course, in the hospital. The photo you see is actually a photo of her in the waiting room in the hospital. So that's probably where she is right now. Janet, what I was saying was you've been talking about the biological war convention essentially, and that can be seen really as part of the whole group of Geneva conventions and all the other conventions that are an attempt by the world to rein in the governments of the world. Of course, the real question is, will any of the great powers, and there are some great powers still wandering around this planet, unfortunately, will any of the great powers really allow themselves to be reined in? Will Russia restrain from bombing civilians in Syria? Will the United States drones refrain from killing people at weddings? What will happen? How will these government actors be brought to heel for the survival of the human race?
Well, these are very weighty questions. And what we're seeing, unfortunately, I think, is playing out a particular part of human psychology, which is very unfortunate, which is that when people assume power over other people, they tend not to act in such benevolent ways. I think the Milgram experiments, the obedience to authority experiments that were done by Stanley Milgram and others, social psychologists, indicate that when you have a power imbalance in a relationship and one person is telling other people what to do, that uh, what ends up happening is that people surrender their free will, and they also seem to surrender their morality. Um, and it does appear that those who have a hunger for power, who want to be president, who want to be prime minister or premier, are not always, the nicest people. They are people who want power, and power in itself is not necessarily such a benevolent thing. what you were just mentioning about drone strikes, bombing people, these are all really horrific events. My core concern about the biological weapons issue is that it does appear, from my research and the research of others, that there is, in the planning stage at least, an effort for deployment in a way that is simply going to change the face of the globe. There's a lot of buzz about depopulation, too many people on the earth, climate change, all this stuff that's keyed to overpopulation, or so the pundits tell us. And if there were to be some solution for the quote unquote population problem that involved wiping out a lot of people, how better to do it than a quote unquote naturally occurring pandemic that wasn't naturally occurring at all. And
Were
this
any of
is,
them ever?
sorry, what was that?
Were any of the modern pandemics ever naturally occurring? After if you look at the graphs, and this is a relevant point. We have a web page on drrematruthreports.com, which you can search by looking by searching Vax Stats Lie, and it's a series of graphs that show that the pro-vax people's statistics lie, and that in fact the great pandemic diseases were not wiped out by vaccines. They were wiped out by hygiene, sanitation, and better nutrition, and it happened decades before vaccination. The point to be made here is that that we how can I say this in a clear way? Um,
The point to be
yes,
made is that uh, there are solutions that enhance easily, quickly, and inexpensively enhance well-being, longevity, and population support. And those are avoided assiduously by those who would use instead methods that damage the genome, damage the population, and serve other agendas. Now, I happen to be convinced that depopulation is a part of the official agenda and that it is sought as a solution to a number of pesky problems. Um, a head of state told me that in 2002 that it was almost time for the great culling to begin, the culling of the useless eaters, the culling of 90% of the useless eaters. And that was because these people are, and I quote, consuming our non-renewable resources. Now, in fact, there are no non-renewable resources to be of any major proportion with modern technology, but the ethos is there, and the things that support populations and enhance their lives and strength and capacity, like sanitation, like better food, like education and hygiene, those things are distorted or they are avoided. And in the face of a very real agenda for depopulation, one doesn't even have to say why. It's quite clear why you would not want to enhance the well being of the majority of the world's people. It can be done easily, cheaply, and properly, and it's not being done. What's being done instead is to harm them, and the artificial plague model is very much part of that that control system. The artificial plagues frequently are introduced by weaponized food or by weaponized vaccines, because you make people sick, whether they're sick with the same thing or different things. You make them sick, you've created an artificial plague, whether it has one name or many.
indeed. And the example I wanted to give, of course, was the 1918 flu pandemic, which was the one at the beginning of the vaccine era. And we haven't had anything that serious since then. and really hadn't had anything that serious in the decades before that, because those diseases had been conquered, as I said, by sanitation and by nutrition and hygiene. What happened with the 1918 flu pandemic was that it was a government vaccine test, in which everything that could go wrong went wrong, or maybe went right. I think, Dr. Rima, you've told that story before as well.
Exactly. It was, I don't believe that things went wrong. I think they went right, righter than any subsequent man-made plague, avian flu, swine flu, or the others. And this was one that they got right, which is probably why the genome was reconstructed and woven into the DNA of the avian flu so that it could be used again. But unfortunately for them, it didn't work a second time.
Well, there are some who believe that some of these recent what uh, pandemic hysterias, swine flu, avian flu, whatever, have have simply been test runs. I don't. I personally believe that it does appear that the technology has advanced to the point where if they really plan to launch something big, they can launch something big. My research, and I discuss this extensively in my book Exile, indicates that the release of this pandemic, that the one that I'm going to Geneva to try to, expose and to detour, um, is linked to certain events that are taking place now in the Middle East. Now, it was looking like 2013 was the target date for the release of the pandemic. And in fact, of U.S. insiders, people in the know, were actually going on CNN and other venues stating, yes, we expect a pandemic by 2013. They were very
I think we're still on. Dr. Rima, we may have lost you. Janet, are you still with us? Dr. Rima, are you still with us? All right, folks, hang on, and we will get them back on. There we go. Hold on, we're trying to get the call back. I'm going to do a hang up and call back. Let's see. It's ringing on both of them, so I must confess it may be here at my end. Let's see what's going on. We were, of course, right in the middle of some very interesting things. Isn't that always the case when these things come off? Well, we have a half an hour left, and we're going to get them back. Are you back on, Dr. Rima? Janet?
One time so far, my apologies.
Yep, that's no problem. But it's Janet. There you go.
bounced off too. I was in the middle.
Yeah,
Can I
please
go on
keep
from
on
where I
going.
was?
Oh, yes, please.
Oh, okay, thank you. Yeah, I'm not sure where I got knocked off, but I was saying that a number of insiders, including former Senators Talent and Graham, who then at that point were working for the Weapons of Mass Destruction Center in Washington, D.C., were making public statements. This was like maybe about 10 years ago. We expect the pandemic by 2013. And that's shocking, because how can you expect a pandemic if a pandemic is a naturally occurring uh, uh, microbial event? How can you expect it? Well, it appeared that certain things were happening in 2013, which I believe would have resulted with the launch.
Here we go again, getting knocked off. Are you back on, folks? Are you back on?
So I wouldn't give you the noise of the.
Yeah, I think we lost Janet again. Janet.
So, right. So, I believe that the release of the pandemic is tied to certain events happening in the Middle East.
It is obvious, folks, that Janet is trying to tell us something of extreme importance. And, it's odd that we're getting problem on Skype. We are actually using a cable connection, which is very fast, and there should not be any drop offs.
Anyway, in this article, I discuss how important this engagement in Syria is to the American government, the NATO allies, and so forth, and how this invasion of Syria and the engagement.
Again, we seem to be interfered with. We're back on. I think we're back on. Janet, are you with us? Obviously, you're trying to tell us something really important, and we're being interfered with in some way. Um, this is a cable connection, and it should not. There should be no interference. Hold on while we try to get the call back. There is interference going on. Well, I'm going to hang up on both of our guest and Dr. Rima and then call them. There we go. We're back on again. Janet, you are trying to say something really important, and we're getting interfered with.
How are we being interfered with, Ralph?
We've got a high-speed cable connection that we're connected to. There should be nothing that's stopping us from getting through. Yet I'm getting a signal about Skype needing to reconnect to both of you, even though you're many thousands of miles apart and connected to me in different ways. So I find that suspicious. But
Well, I'm
Janet,
getting
please
the same
continue.
message. I'm getting the same message, Ralph.
All right.
Interestingly, I am not.
Are you on?
But
You
then
are on
again,
Skype.
but then again, I'm not on Skype.
Oh, you're
I'm
not.
on. Oh, wait a minute. Yes, I am. I'm on Skype. I am on Skype, but I'm on Skype on my cell phone, and I'm not getting that message. I don't know if there's a difference.
Well, the information I'm really trying to get out here is that I think that the release of the pandemic may be imminent because we are, as I can see it, 2 steps away on the global chessboard from release. And if people are not following quite the connection here due to the repeated interruptions, I urge you to look for As Goes Syria, So Goes the World, because it is discussed in that article, which you can find online, free to read.
Let me tell you what I do to make sure that I am not exposed to pandemic disease or any other disease. And after all, I'm in a hospital which is rife with C. diff and uh, resistant organisms and so on. And I have no fear of these organisms. And that is that I make sure that I take nano silver 10 parts per million every single day. I take it prophylactically, and I make sure that my body has an immune system boost that is like a guard all shield. Nothing is going to penetrate it. And that is one of the reasons that its power and its non toxic characteristics. One of the reasons that we make it available as a health tool for putting your health in your hands. Even if vaccines worked, which they don't, you wouldn't need them if you were properly supported in terms of your immune system. And the best support that I know is Nano Silver. It's available at NSF Marketplace. It's a remarkable health product. I am surrounded by lethal organisms, and I have no concern uh, because of the nano silver that I have with me and that I take. Just having it with you won't do it. But most of the world doesn't have nano silver. I urge you to get it if you are taking what Janet is saying very seriously. NSFmarketplace.com. But most of the world will not be protected. And what do you know about the nature of the organism or organisms that you suspect, Janet? And what do you know about the uh, any other factors of this imminent or apparently imminent release of a world plague?
I know absolutely nothing about the agent except that it's probably not contagious. So it's probably not contagious. So if they're going with selective delivery systems, which would be either the vaccines or the water system as described in my article, Water as a Weapon, which has been substantially the water systems having been substantially tweaked to provide a selective delivery system. If they're going with either of those, they're probably not going to use an agent that is contagious because they want to hit the targets and leave the non-targets alone. If they're going with selectivity of agent, which would mean a gene weapon, then I mean, this is technology that is far beyond the grasp of most of us mere mortals. So all that I personally know how to do is to lay out the research. We have the delivery systems in place. We have the changes in the legislation. We have the U.S. massively violating the BWC and nobody wants to do anything about it. We have the U.S. lying to the BWC. We have we have reports from insiders to expect the pandemic imminently. And then we have the US's engagement in the Middle East in the manners in which are discussed in that book, in the article, As Goes Syria, So Goes the World. So I believe that one can make a compelling case for intent to deploy. I
Let's talk. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
So all I personally know how to do is to take this evidence, to bring it to the UN, and not that I trust the UN one whit, but to, to then get the press coverage, which I have arranged to get for my presentation. And that's all I know how to do.
Um, would you talk a little about your work, your investigation of Dr. Death in South Africa and his funding and projects?
Well, see, this is a very interesting case study because this is where it does appear that a selectively targeted gene weapon has indeed been created and deployed. And yes, I'm so glad you brought that up, Dr. Rima. Dr. Death, that would be Dr. Vuder Basson, was a, uh, a medical doctor who was in charge of Project Coast, which was the apartheid South Africa's chemical and biological weapons program. And Dr. Vuder Basson, among multiple other criminal activities, was known to be developing a blacks only bioweapon. That would be a bioweapon that would only affect people of color. And his work on this is fairly shrouded in mystery. He doesn't want to talk about it. People who knew him don't want to talk about it. But based on information that I have received from a number of sources, Dr. Death, Dr. Vuder Basson, was actually successful in creating a blacks only bioweapon. And what he did was he found something in terms of a biochemical substance that attaches onto the melanin. So people with darker skins have more melanin. And my initial tip off said that the reason that people of color, uh, African Americans, Mexicans, indigenous people, have a higher rate of the silent killers of diabetes and hypertension is because Dr. Busan completed his research. He basically developed the blacks only bioweapon in the early 80s, and he used his contacts at Portondown in Great Britain and also Langley and got this basically leaked into processed food. Now, if you look at the rates of diabetes and hypertension, they suddenly start to spike in the 80s. And they spike specifically among darker skinned populations and even more specifically among darker skinned populations that are eating processed food, living in cities.
I
People,
have some problems with this, Janet. Let me tell you why.
sure.
When I was a medical student, I began medical school in 1966. And when I was a medical student in Detroit, I decided that I needed to do something in addition to the studying I was doing, and I needed to make some sort of humanitarian impact in the city in which I was living. And I started working with a group of Black people who asked for help. I said we would supply the equipment and the doctors, and they needed to set their priorities for the clinic that we would set up, the free clinic. And they said, and I quote, "We die of the sugar, which is what they call diabetes, and of heart disease more than you do, more than you white folks do. And we want to know how to change that." And I was a first year medical student. What did I know? And I started looking at the statistics, and I saw that there was no question that the rates of cardiac disease and the rates of diabetes were significantly higher in the Black community. It wasn't yet the African American community, it was at that time the Black community, and same people. And when I started finding out about that, I discovered that that had been true for quite some time. And processed food was, yes, there was processed food, but it wasn't the destroyed, degraded, ubiquitous disaster that it is at this point that it became in the 80s. This was in 1966, 1967. So it's hard for me to fully credit that it only was because of Dr. Basant's hideous work.
So I'm
Now,
sorry, just to make sure I understand, you're saying that this is kidney failure. This is diabetes and kidney
no,
failure.
no, diabetes and heart disease. Of
Okay.
course, kidney failure often goes along with the chronic diabetes and the circulatory problems, but the main issues were diabetes and cardiovascular disease, and they understood that, and they wanted to change that. Now, it may be that there was an addition to the problem, but the problem has existed for a significant period of time. It has to do with the general diet distortions and the cultural factors as well as the genetic factors. Maybe Dr. Basant got the bright idea that you could make it worse in some way, but it was not an equal playing field in terms of disease incidence before widely spread contaminated, weaponized, processed food.
Okay, well, the problem I have with that, Dr. Rima, is when I did the research, on Dr. Bassan, I looked at a number of the different organizations that have been gathering figures on the incidence of diabetes and hypertension on, all sorts of groups, people of color, white people, whatever. And the rates clearly started to spike in the 80s. So, you know, anecdotal information is always very useful, but the the evidence that has been put forth by the different foundations looking at this have really shown that spike happening in the 80s and then onward from there.
Well, it may be that it was a known tendency, a genetically based and culturally enhanced tendency that was worked upon or enhanced by these evil people. That's entirely possible. Hey, these people have more diabetes and more heart disease. Let's make it worse. Let's use that tendency. Could be.
Folks, we have about 14 minutes left on the Dr. Rima Truth Reports, reminding you again that you can always catch the live broadcasts on our YouTube channel, which you can get to from our healthfreedomportal.org. And of course, it's all archived on the same place. You'll be able to go back and see dozens and dozens of really extraordinary Dr. Rima Truth Reports. Well,
You know, I don't know if we have told people that our principal website, since I didn't come on at the beginning of the show the way I usually do because of technical issues, our principal website is drrimatruthreports.com. That's DRRIMA truthreports.com. And when you go there, you have the opportunity to put your name and your first name and your email in. And that's a really good thing to do, because when you do that, you will find that you are receiving our newsletters, and they are chock full of information that you cannot get anywhere else, or that you get first from us, and action items, things that you can do about the things that are happening, like the CDC action item. If we do not flood the CDC with our protest, no, no, and no, you may not take control of our body. No, you may not force vaccination, chemotherapy, or other treatment, or withhold treatment from our bodies. No, no, and no, you may not abduct anyone in the United States and hold them indefinitely. And no, no, and no, you may not cancel arbitrarily, illegally, unconstitutionally the right of informed consent. No, no, and no. If you do not take that action, and if you do not share it with your friends and neighbors to take this action, then they will take this action, and they will own our bodies. Own our bodies. I invite you to go to drrematruthreports.com and take that action, or to go to tinyurl.com/informed consent protection. This is beyond urgent. This is a fight to the death, but it's our death if we do nothing.
Absolutely. And you can find, you'll see if you go to the front page of drrematstruthreports.com that we have a countdown timer there reminding everyone of the number of days left before the CDC can do what it wants. They are legally obligated to respond to the comments that are filed before the deadline. And because we filed comments, we are in a position to sue if we can when the time comes. Uh, we're going to need your support to do that, and we're going to need bringing this thing viral. The way to stop it is to do what we did in the past. We proved over and over again in the past decade that pushback works. Whether it started in 2007 when the FDA tried to sneak through its infamous CAM guidance, uh, filing it at the last minute, not bothering to issue press releases that it was filed, waiting 2 months before putting it in the Federal Register so nobody would find it until it was almost too late to file comments. And yet we flooded the FDA system with 500,000 comments. System crashed. FDA never finalized its CAM guidance. And then in 2009 and 2010, we got involved, of course, very much in the swine flu pandemic, and 3.5 million people sent messages to their representatives about refusing the swine flu vaccine. And of course, as you know, the vaccine was barely used by anyone, even though the government spent $6 billion to buy 150 million doses, hardly any of which were ever used. And there was no pandemic because there was no vaccination uh, to spread the disease. In 2010 and 2011, 5 million people sent messages to Congress and protected our dietary supplements when Congress adopted the FDA's so-called food safety law. And it went on from there. Dr. Rima in Chile in 2013, a million and a half people, was it, stopped the Monsanto law, Le Monsanto, the law that would have given companies like Monsanto control over all the seeds in Chile. A great victory. Well, now we have to do it again in order to stop the CDC and its effort to abolish our right of informed consent.
Indeed, as Thomas Jefferson said, the price of liberty is eternal vigilance. And we, yes, have to do it again. And we will have to do it again after that, and again, and again, and again. That is the nature of protecting your freedom. And Janet is in the process of protecting her freedom. Janet, I want
Oh
to
no,
know
Dr.
how
Rima, I want to make it really clear. I'm trying to protect the
your life.
lives of untold millions of people who will be affected by this released pandemic. That's what I'm trying to do here.
Indeed, indeed. And you're trying to protect your life as well. Um, what can we do to help you?
Well, I really appreciate the airtime, Dr. Rima and Ralph, getting, this issue discussed. I think it's pivotal that people pay attention to the sorts of the backroom machinations that are going on about this biological weapons stuff. So, it appears to be fairly imminent. And actually, I don't know if we have the time here, but you probably don't. While we were on the air, I just got an email from another reporter who's in Eastern Europe concerning his work on uh, the Lugar lab in the Republic of Georgia, and what his investigations have come up with this lab that has been run by the United States in Tbilisi, Georgia. And this gentleman, Jeffrey Silverman, for his good work, had his citizenship revoked by the United States. Jeffrey Silverman was born in the
Wow.
United States. So we have, full scale problems, lawfare, some people call it, legalized, weaponized warfare going on against people in all sorts of different ways. Anyway, I think we are just about out of time. I just really wanted to mention, this other case of this other journalist and what's happened to him. This journalist who's also trying to expose the biological weapons agenda of the United States.
Wow. And we would love to have him on our show.
Excellent. I'll let him know.
Please.
Please.
You are speaking out for truth. You are speaking out for humanity. And I salute you. Anytime, in any way that we can help you, Janet, please let us know.
Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate your having me on, both of you.
Absolutely.
Thank you and God
Um,
bless.
Thank you. Thank you. Janet is, well, actually, we have about 6 minutes according to my timekeeper here. Ralph, do we have a few more
Yes.
minutes?
Oh, yeah, we have six.
Why is,
We
hello?
have 6 more minutes. Yes.
Why are these shows important? First of all, they are things that we are covering topics that affect your life directly that you're never going to hear about, not only on the mainstream media, but on most of the independent media, because the independent media has developed its own agenda. Uh, our agenda is to bring you the truth and to support your freedom, to give you the tools that you need to make your own decisions, to bring you the health products that you need, to bring you the health information and the political information in a wide ranging array of topics from a wide ranging and diverse set of speakers and investigators and research. Janet Fallon is a good example. She's a poet, she's a journalist, she's an author, she's an investigator, and she is a thorn in the side of the great ones. We're thorns in the sides of the great ones too. And you need to be a thorn. You see, I believe it is the responsibility of free men and women to be thorns. If you're not a thorn in somebody's side, you're not doing anything. If you're not a thorn in the side of the people who want to kill you for their own purposes, you're not doing anything. If you're not a thorn in the side of the people who want to destroy the economy and with it, your life, your substance, your ability to feed yourself and house and clothe and feed your family, then you're not taking your responsibility for occupying space on this planet seriously. And that means you need to be taking the actions that are easily available to you. Our action items can be taken with your freedom mouse. You don't have to discommode yourself in any way to take action effectively. Now, it is true if one person or seven people or 26 people take an action, it is not effective. But if 26,000 or 260,000 or 2.6 million say to the decision makers, and remember, one of our action items might go to 30 different decision makers. And so 1,000 people taking the action would result in 30,000 emails being sent. 10,000 would result in 300,000 emails being sent because each one has multiple targets. You take the action, you click the freedom mouse, you send the emails, and you are saying, I am in charge of my life, and don't you dare attempt to control, corral, or kill me. That's pretty important stuff. And most people sort of slide by, not focusing on that. But if you don't focus on that, the consequences are, as we heard in our discussion with Janet Phelan, the consequences can be far larger than you ever imagined, and they can be quite literally deadly. Ralph?
Indeed, Dr. Rima. Here in the last 2 minutes of this episode of the Dr. Rima Truth Reports, where we've explored a lot of things, we've looked at the way the medical system has been impacting Dr. Rima and General Burt. We looked at the way the legal system has been impacting Janet Phelan. We looked at a lot about the law of informed consent and the law of the weapons of mass destruction conventions and other issues. And what we've come to conclude is that we are all being targeted in so many different ways by so many different power systems that we have to keep our eyes on people like Janet, who are really, in many ways, the canaries in the coal mine. They are the people who are pushing the outer limits, just like Dr. Rima does. And the pushback they get from the system shows us the nature of what's going on and what we can all expect in the future. General Byrd is alive because Dr. Rima pushed back.
That's
If
exactly
not,
right.
if not, he would be just another 86-year-old man who died, period. Go to the hospital and die.
Who, as they would say, didn't make it.
Right, right. But he
So
had
they,
something that they didn't
and
have, and that was nutrition and some magic help, you know, and intentionality, some very strong intentionality. Bert is not
precisely.
one to give up, let me tell you. And that's it, folks.
I'm
The end
sorry,
of
I
another
can't hear
episode.
you. I think I've lost you.
Oh,
I think I've lost you. Well, if you can hear me,
there it is, folks. It is the end of another Dr. Rima Truth Reports. Uh, Unexpectedly, with people dropping off the line, but hey, we're used to that sort of thing happening. We will see you again next Wednesday. Thank you.